Hello class, welcome to your English class students. As we are discussing about poetry, so students, our today's poem is From I Explain a Few Things. Okay, so it has been penned down by Pablo Neruda. So let's get started with the poet's biography. Pablo Neruda, from July 12 to 1904 to September 23, 1973. Okay, is his lifespan was the pen name and later legal name of the Chilean writer and political Neftali Ricardo Reyes Busalto. Okay, so students, the pen name is Pablo Neruda and his full name was Neftalo Ricardo Reyes Busalto. Neruda assumed his pen name as a teenager. When he was a teenager, he just assumed the pen name as Pablo Neruda. Why? Because it was in vogue, partly to hide his poetry from his father. Okay, a rigid man who wanted his son to have a practical occupation, but Neruda just liked to write poetries. That's why he assumed that name, Neruda. Okay, Neruda's pen name was derived from Czech writer and poet Jan Neruda. So उनका नाम जो है वो कहाँ से डिराइव हुआ? जेच राइटर जिनका नाम था जैन नेरूडा. पैब्लो इज थॉट टू बी फ्रॉम पॉल वेरलाइन, और पैब्लो जो नेम है, पैब्लो नेरूडा है ना, तो जैन नेरूडा के नाम से नेरूडा लिया गया है और पैब्लो जो है वो एक पॉल वेरलाइन से लिया गया. ठीक है. विद हिज वर्क्स एंड ट्रांसलेटेड इनटू मैनी लैंग्वेजेस, Pablo Neruda is considered one of the greatest and most influential poets of the 20th century. तो ये 20th century के बहुत influential poet माने जाते हैं. Neruda was accomplished in a variety of styles ranging from erotically charged love poems, like his collection love poems लिखी हैं इन्होंने बहुत ज़्यादा, जिनमें 20 poems of love and a sad song of despair. Okay. Surrealist poems, historical epics and overtly political manifestos. ठीक है. तो surrealist means an artist or writer which is an exponent and avant-garde movement in art and literature which sought to release the creative potential with sensitive matters or people of the unconscious mind. Okay, and historical epics and overtly political manifestos. In 1971, Neruda won the Nobel Prize for Literature, a controversial means giving rise or likely to give rise to public disagreement. ठीक है, इनको नोबेल प्राइज मिला लेकिन वो पब्लिक डिसएग्रीमेंट बन गया था बिकॉज ऑफ हिज पॉलिटिकल एक्टिविज्म. ओके, Colombian novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez once called him the greatest poet of the 20th century in language. Okay, in language में इनको greatest poet बोला गया. किसके द्वारा? एक कोलंबियन नॉवलिस्ट थे जिनका नाम था गैब्रियल गार्सिया मार्क्वेज. Okay, during his lifetime, Neruda occupied many diplomatic posts and served a stint as a senator for the Chilean Communist Party. तो अपनी लाइफ टाइम में नेरूडा ने जो है डिप्लोमेटिक पोस्ट जो है हासिल की है अपनी लाइफ में. ठीक है, और सर्व किया द स्टिंट एंड सीनेटर. स्टिंट मीन्स सप्लाई अ वेरी अनजेनरस और इनएडुकेट अमाउंट ऑफ समथिंग. ओके, एंड वन मोर थिंग स्टूडेंट्स, चाइलियन मीन्स एक साउथ अमेरिकन. व्हेन कंजर्वेटिव Chilean President González Videla outlawed communism in Chile, a warrant was issued for Neruda's arrest. Okay, warrant issue हो गया नेरूडा के अरेस्ट के लिए. Friends hid him for months in a house basement in Chilean port of Valparaiso. Later, Neruda escaped into exile through a mountain pass where Mahue Lequentio, Argentina. So years later, Neruda was a close collaborator to Socialist President Salvador Allende. Neruda was hospitalized with cancer at the time of Chilean coup d'etat led by Augusto Pinochet. 3 days after being hospitalized, Neruda died of heart failure. Already a legend in life, Neruda's death reverberated around the world. Pinochet had denied permission to transform Neruda's funeral into a public event. However, thousands of grieving Chileans disobeyed the curfew and crowded the streets. Neruda's funeral became the first public protest against the Chilean military dictatorship. Okay, so this is all about Neruda, Pablo Neruda. So, students, the poem from I explain a few things is a poem of lamentation, grief. Okay, Spanish Civil War, in which the noted poets Federico Garcia Lorca and Rafael Albert were killed. The poet lived in Madrid, Spanish capital, that symbolized prosperity, beauty, and a promising future. But the Civil War destroyed it. Blood spilled everywhere. The poets described despair and devastation, tyranny, and vandalism through the symbols of jackals, bandits, stones, vipers, fire, blood, and bullets. In the end, the poet questions his own attitude by not composing poems about dreams and beauties of his homeland. But he clarifies that how could he do it when there was blood everywhere in the street of Madrid, the blood of Spain's posterity, blood of children. There are plenty of symbols and unique phrases in the poem which enrich it. The lines of this poem were quoted by Harold Pinter, the Nobel Prize winner for Drama 2005, in his Nobel lecture. The poem is also a reflection of modern world which has witnessed umpteen wars and enough bloodshed. This poem is a part of poem taken from I explain a few things. So let's get started with the poem. I lived in a quarter in Madrid with bells, with clocks, with trees. From there could be seen the dry face of Castile, like a sea of leather. My house was named. So, in these opening lines of the poem, the poet gives a description of the place where he used to live in Madrid, the capital of Spain. It was a charming place with its church bells like clocks and lovely trees. It was a place from where one could see a dry face of Castile and that looked like a sea of leather. So, in other words, the dry plateau of Castile hummed with life and activity. Okay. Then the house of the flowers, because everywhere geraniums exploded. It was a beautiful house with dogs and little children. Raul, you agree? You agree, Raphael? Federico, you agree? Beneath the earth, you agree about my house with balconies where the light of June drowned flowers in your mouth. So, in these lines, the poet's house was named House of Flowers because there were geraniums blooming everywhere. Geraniums are the very beautiful flowers. So it was beautiful house with dogs and little children frolicking everywhere. The poet recalls some of his friends who used to visit his house. They included names like Raul, Raphael, Federico. They were all killed during the Civil War. They were lying dead under the earth now. Recalling them, the poet says that they would admit what he has said about his house. It was a house with balconies where, with the coming of June, flowers grew so high that they reached above the mouth of a person. So then, brother, brother, the build of roofs with the cold sun on which the weather vane tires, the fine fringed ivory of tomatoes multiplied down to sea, and one morning all of that burned. One morning The bonfire slept from the earth, devouring beings. Then the poet calls those dead friends his brothers. Referring to of his house, the poet says that it could look marvelously beautiful in the light of winter sun. There was a weather vane that looked tired, moving all the time. In the roof of his house, one could also see the rich crops of potatoes and tomatoes extending up to the sea. Then the poet describes how the peaceful life of the Spanish people was spoiled one morning when suddenly big fire broke out. These fires rose high into the sky and devoured large number of men. Then moving on to another lines. And from that moment, fire gunpowder, from that moment, thugs and plains, and the Moors, thugs with signet rings, and duchesses, thugs with black friars' blessing, came through the sky to laughter children, and through the streets the blood of the children flowed easily like the blood of children, jackals that the jackals would drive away, stones that the dry thistle would bite and spit out. Then, in these lines, poet explained that from that moment it was fire into gunpowder, exploding everywhere. From that moment it was blood and blood everywhere. Dangerous criminals and Moors came in aeroplanes and killed the people. There were among them rich aristocrated people and their ladies also who robbed the people and killed them. They were bandits who had the support of religious friars. They came through the sky to kill children. They killed so many children that the blood of children ran freely through the streets. Those people were jackals who could be driven away by jackals only. They were stones which even dry thistles could be afraid to bite. They were vipers whom even vipers would hate. Okay? Opposed to you, I have seen the blood of Spain rise up to drown you in a single wave of pride and knives. General status, consider my dead house, consider Spain broken. So students, let's first have a brief look at the political situation in Spain in those days. In 1930, dictatorship was overthrown in Spain and the Republicans came to power 1930s to 1935. They made all kinds of laws for the benefit of workers. Pablo Neruda was then in Spain as a diplomat. He was as very happy with the political developments in the country. But then in 1936, a civil war was broke out. A revolt was led by General Federico Franz. He was helped by the other dictators like Hitler and Mussolini in Europe. The revolutionaries caused a terrible bloodshed during the civil war. About 1 million people were killed and there was fire and destruction all around. The power of the country came into the bands of Franco. All this filled Pablo Neruda with terrible pain. In these lines, the poet expresses hope that the people of Spain will one day rise up, have their revenge on the perpetrators of cruelty and bloodshed. Here the poet says that he has seen the bloody revolutionaries of Spain causing a terrible destruction and killing people. Among those killed ones, there were his friends also. The heartless revolutionaries tried to drown the whole of Spain in blood. They were blind in their pride and stabbed people to death with their knives. They were traitors in the form of military generals. The poet's own house was all broken and destroyed. Luckily for the poet, he was not in Spain at that time. But from every dead house, burning metal flows in place of flowers. But from every hollow of Spain, Spain rises. But from every dead child rises a gun with eyes. But from every crime are born bullets that will find you one day in the house of the heart. You will ask why his poetry has nothing of the earth of the leaves. So, students, in spite of all this destruction, the poet had a firm hope in his heart. He has certain that in Spain, a fiery determination would now grow in place of flowers in every house. There would be an uprising in every part of Spain. In place of every dead child, there would be born child with a gun in his hand. And in answer to every crime, there would be born children with bullets in their hands. And they would find their targets in the hearts of those criminals and killers. So, students, the poet has now stopped writing poems on the beauty of nature. The theme of his poems was now changed. Now changed. Of the grand volcanoes of his native country, come and see the blood through the streets, come and see the blood through the streets, come and see the blood through the streets. So, students, now the poet just asks that people could ask him why he no longer wrote poems of the earths, of the leaves, and the great volcanoes of his native countries, that is Chile. The poet tells such people to come and see the blood flowing in the streets, then they will themselves know why the poet has stopped writing poems on the beauty of nature with a deep pain in his heart. He repeats, come and see the blood through the streets. Okay, so students, this is all about this poem. This poem is about the civil war in Spain. Okay, so students, thank you very much.